Conflicts around the world are affecting the lives of 2 billion people. Half of them are women and girls. Conflicts worsen discrimination against women and increase their vulnerability. They may experience forced evictions and property loss during the conflict and after the conflict. They may also face further obstacles to recover land through restitution processes and when claiming their inheritance or marital property. However, women are not just victims. They also play a critical role in preventing and resolving conflicts and in building and sustaining peace within societies. To play this role, women need to feel secure in their communities and empowered to participate meaningfully in decision-making and planning. Housing, land, and property rights are an essential enabler of both. Why women's land rights matter everywhere, but even more in fragile contexts. When women have housing, land, and property rights, they contribute to the socio-economic development of their families and communities. They are closer to realizing their right to equality. They have a greater say in household decisions. They are more empowered to exit abusive and violent relationships, and their autonomy and self-determination increases. In fragile and conflict-affected contexts, strengthening women's housing, land, and property rights can help societies move from humanitarian vulnerability towards recovery and self-reliance, laying the foundations for state building and peace. If women's housing, land, and property rights are protected, their resilience increases. Women are more capable to provide for themselves and for their families. They can cope better with the socio-economic impact of conflict and with the loss of family and community support often brought about by conflict and displacement. If women's housing, land, and property rights are protected, their vulnerabilities are reduced. They are better protected from physical and psychological violence, extreme weather, and other hazards brought about by conflict and displacement. And they are less likely to take up risky behaviors or adopt negative coping mechanisms such as the sale of sex, forced marriage, or other harmful practices. Let's look at how this plays out during conflicts and displacement, upon return, for conflict prevention and in the recovery phase. When her husband is killed in armed conflict, Sarah and her children flee their village to seek refuge. They find temporary shelter in a host community. Sarah tries unsuccessfully to rent a house. She does not feel safe knowing she and her family could be evicted at any moment. Sarah is not alone. Displaced people face many challenges in accessing their housing, land, and property rights. What can we do to protect women and men's housing, land, and property rights during conflict and displacement? During conflict and displacement, it is urgent that all stakeholders work together to identify and promote suitable options that can serve as many people as possible, while working on longer-term solutions. These will be different in every context. Collecting sex disaggregated data can help to better understand the local context and issues. Forcibly displaced women are amongst the most vulnerable groups. Safeguarding them from forced evictions and other hazards should be a priority. Legal and administrative blockages that prevent displaced people from using, renting, or owning houses, land, and properties need to be removed, and the use of clear and fair housing, land, and property agreements promoted. The retrieval and issuing or reissuing of civil and tenure documents needs to be supported. While it is essential to be pragmatic, it is necessary to ensure that the approaches used for protecting the housing, land, and property rights of displaced people do not reinforce gender discriminatory practices. It's important to work closely with local organizations and influential individuals in host communities. If they are consulted and involved, They are more likely to understand and look favorably on action to support women's housing, land and property rights. Common property and land-based resources should be identified and women's access and use of these protected. Support centers can play a vital role, providing legal counseling and assistance to help displaced people overcome the barriers they face accessing their land and property rights. When Sarah is finally able to return home, her brother-in-law is trying to sell her house. He claims that, as he is the sole male heir of his brother's estate, the property is now his. But Sarah knows that she and her late husband had joint ownership of the house. She is afraid, but she is determined to regain access to her family home. She speaks to the traditional leaders who agree to organize a mediation meeting. The brother-in-law is made aware of Sarah's rights and he is required to return the property. Thanks to the support of the community leaders, Sarah is not forced to go to court, and so she is able to keep good relations with her husband's family. She can now focus on providing for her family and rebuilding her life. Sarah is motivated to get involved in public life when she realizes that her case was one of the lucky ones, and not all women have her level of tenure security. What would help Sarah, and women like her, to play a greater role in land-related processes upon return? Strong social norms are one of the most significant obstacles to women's housing, land and property rights, limiting both women's understanding of their rights and their options for seeking redress when these rights are denied. Upon return, women individually and through associations can be supported with awareness raising and training. It's important that the materials used are easy to understand and that trainings are held in accessible locations and at convenient times. To be effective, awareness should be accompanied by individual counseling and legal assistance. The practical barriers that prevent women from accessing their housing, land and property rights need to be removed. Depending on the context, this might include issuing or reissuing of civil and land tenure documents, making dispute resolution mechanisms, legal representation and mediation easily accessible, and facilitating access to land administration services, credit and microfinance. Women need to be empowered to participate and lead land-related processes. They should be included in all peace negotiations, land conflict resolution mechanisms, as well as restitution or compensation processes. Sarah's hope is that her children can grow and bring up their families in peace. While conflict brings devastation and loss, it can also provide a window of opportunity to do things differently. How can Sarah and others like her be supported to use this opportunity to work towards conflict prevention and recovery? Any intervention aiming at conflict prevention and recovery should include awareness-raising activities on the importance of securing housing, land and property rights for women and men, and on the legal frameworks protecting them. The tenure options that are most viable need to be identified. Marriage and inheritance are key entry points for protecting women's housing, land and property rights. The registration of marriages through written marital contracts, including joint tenure arrangements for couples, should be promoted and included in the national legal and administrative frameworks. Inheritance renunciation should be combated and regulated. An integrated approach to family estate planning should be promoted. Inheritance provisions can be complemented with the use of wills, gifts, and support to the purchase of houses and land. Women's participation should be a requirement in all key consultations and decision-making processes. They should be given equal opportunities to be employed in land administration and land management positions. Discriminatory legal and administrative systems need to be reformed and harmonized with international frameworks. Where legal pluralism exists, state and non-state actors, customary and religious leaders should come together to align the provisions in the different legal systems. They should clarify when each system should be applied and remove the grey areas that create jurisdictional confusion that negatively affects the most vulnerable people and women. Joint signatures in land tenure documents should be made standard practice. Women's groups and organizations should be supported to develop their capacity to deal with land-related issues. Sex disaggregated data should continue to be collected to monitor the challenges faced by women in relation to their land rights and to guide decision-making. The protection of women's housing, land and property rights is critically important in supporting societies to move from humanitarian vulnerability towards recovery and self-reliance. We hope these key messages will help strengthen your efforts for a more sustainable, equitable and peaceful future. Visit our website to learn more.